The release of the version 2.7 story quest, Dawn Breaks on Dark Tides, has created a really interesting situation within the Wuthering Waves community. If you look at the feedback, you will see two completely different stories being told. On one side, you have a huge number of players calling it a cinematic masterpiece, the absolute peak of the game storytelling so far. And on the other, you have those who find it narratively flawed, uneven, and emotionally unsatisfying. I didn't pay attention to the story, so I'll rate it 7 out of 10, am I right? So how can one story produce two such opposite reactions? How can it be both the best and, for some, one of the most frustrating things the game has done? This quest wasn't just another update, it was the grand finale to the entire multi-patch 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆 story arc. And the answer to that question, I think, lies in what Kuro Games chose to prioritize. They aimed for an epic, serialized conclusion, and in many ways, they succeeded spectacularly. But that same ambition also exposed some of the biggest weaknesses in their narrative design. So in this video, we're going to break down that reception. We will start with the fundamental change in storytelling that made this quest feel so different. Look at the cinematic moments that created so much of the positive sentiment, and then dig into the valid criticisms around character interactions, antagonist fatigue, and the gameplay experience itself. But before we dive into it, let's take a moment to properly unpack the dense 6-hour narrative of the story quest, because it's a culmination of the entire 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆 arc, weaving together threads from across multiple updates. Beware, spoilers ahead. The quest begins with Rover and Abby's return to 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆, specifically the city of Ragoon, where they meet up with Brant and Rachia. The atmosphere is tense. The city is not as cheerful as they left it, plagued with strange dreams of 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗆's fall. Their immediate goal is to find 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆 to help unlock the civilization capsule. It is a relic found in Septimont that holds critical historical data, but it requires Leviathan's power. It is quickly hinted that the Sentinel and the Trinodian are more connected than previously thought, explaining this power requirement. As Rover investigates, they encounter citizens experiencing peculiar nightmares, often involving monsters from Cristoforo's unfinished plays or visions of a city of eternal bliss. These dreams, exclusive to 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗆, are orchestrated by the playwright Fraxidus Cristoforo, who manipulates fear and imagination. The narrative takes a dramatic turn when Rover and Cantarella arrive at 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗆's inverted tower, only to witness Galbrina seemingly assassinate 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗆𝗆 with a dark tide bullet. Cantarella is distraught and Rover is enraged, vowing blood for blood. However, immediate investigation reveals inconsistencies. 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗆 showed no resistance, and her resonance still flickers, suggesting that she might not be truly gone. Cantarella reveals 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗆 had urgently summoned her, fearing a link to the dark tide or Leviathan. The hunt for Galbrina leads Rover and Abby into Thessalio Fells, and there they encountered Avidius, who has recovered from his previous mental struggles and is also hunting the Discord Slayer, Galbrina, believing her responsible for recent Tacet Discord outbreaks. Avidius reveals Ragoon City was overrun, forcing evacuations to the Alvarado Vault, and expresses his personal journey to write his own story, free from Cristoforo's script. His connection to the mysterious ancient tyrant who commanded the dark tide through fear is hinted at through shared memories. Rover uses telepathy to trace the dark tide's influence, leading them to the Alvarado Vault, where Zani and Carlotta are managing the evacuations. Galbrina arrives, demonstrating her unique ability to kill humanoid tide spawn by exposing them as illusions. A false Fenrico, an imitation created by the antagonist, attacks, seeking the civilization capsule, but is defeated. This battle confirms Galbrina's true purpose. She is hunting the Harbinger to prevent a greater calamity. Through Galbrina, more vital lore is revealed. The Leviathan's core power was stolen and hidden hidden in a gem, which the Fractionists are now using to resurrect it. The true harbinger of the dark tide resonates with 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆's darkest emotions, feeding the tide spawn and causing them to mimic humans. It is heavily implied this harbinger is Avidius. 𝗆𝗆𝗆, now revealing her name, is actually Angel, confirming the theories that many players had, explains that the death of 𝗏𝗏𝗆 was a carefully orchestrated plan. 𗏏𝗏𝗆 sacrificed herself to become an anchor within Leviathan's consciousness, allowing Angel to split her godhood from her humanity and trap Leviathan's frequency. Angel offers herself as Rover's first bullet to enter Leviathan's domain and stop its full rebirth, despite the immense personal cost. And then Rover delves into Leviathan's fabricated journeying paradise, a distorted reflection of 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆 built from human fears and hopes. Here, through visions orchestrated by Chimera, Angel's tacit Discord companion, a wise but savage entity, Rover witnesses Angel's past struggles. As a child, Angel possessed immense resonance but was ostracized. She fled 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆 to prevent its corruption, constantly fighting tacit discords. She adopted the name 𝗆𝗆𝗆, originally a legendary flame demon tacit discord, to strike fear into enemies. Her desperate pact with the Chimera, driven by a will to survive and fight the dark tide, granted her the power to devour tide spawn. Rover also confronts Cristoforo in a mindscape. Cristoforo, reveling in his role as the playwright of 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆's tragic fate, taunts Rover with the visions of fallen companions. He confirms Avidius was his creation, a scapegoat whose noble wishes were twisted. Cristoforo offers Rover the quill to rewrite humanity's fate, only for Rover to reject his manipulative philosophy. The story culminates in a grand Avengers Assemble moment. Rover, now understanding his role as an anchor of hope, is joined by the entire cast. Augusta and Lupa from Septimont, Zani, Carlotta, Peeb, Grant and Rachia from 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆, Shorekeeper and Alto from the Black Shores, alongside Colcharo and Booling, arrive to reinforce the defensive lines. In the final confrontation within Leviathan's core, the heroes collectively fight a corrupted version of 𝗏𝗏𝗆. The people of 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆, inspired by hope, sing a hymn of humanity that empowers Rover. The battle is a spectacular showcase of combined efforts. Rover separates Leviathan's gem, Angel absorbs its dark essence, and an ethereal Fenrico, returning in spirit, having redeemed himself by protecting Raguna, helps Rover deliver the final blow. With Leviathan defeated, 𝗏𝗏𝗆 is revived. The Fractionists, Cristoforo, Scar, and a new figure, the Grand Architect, retreated, acknowledging that their plans were disrupted but not entirely foiled. Frolova, though, being alive, having apparently cut ties with the Fractionists, expresses her intent to find her own path. Good for her. The remaining heroes share a bittersweet farewell, having forged a new unity between Septimont and 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆. While questions about Abby's true nature and the future of the regions linger, Phoebe is entrusted with the civilization capsule representing 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆's future. This was a massive sprawling story, and its sheer ambition is the first thing we need to talk about. So the very significant achievement of version 2.7 wasn't a specific cutscene or a simple character moment, it was a fundamental change in how they tell their story. For a long time, Wuthering Waves' main story felt like a series of isolated little episodes. A new patch would drop, and with it, a new story focused almost entirely on the new banner character. It was definitely effective for selling you on that character, but as a narrative, it often felt like you were just playing through a very long, very pretty advertisement. I mean, very well-made advertisement, am I right? Version 2.7 breaks from that. Instead of another small personal story, we got a single big story focused on finishing the entire 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗆 arc. And because of this, the writers were able to pull on plot threads and details from way back in the earlier patches. Things that seemed like minor details suddenly mattered, and events from months ago were given real consequences. For anyone who has been following along closely, this made the story feel earned. The big moments didn't come out of nowhere, they were the result of things that had been building for nearly a year. This was also a direct and I think successful response to a major community complaint. People were tired of getting invested in a character and their world, only for them to be put on the shelf the moment the next patch arrived, leaving a feeling that nothing had long-term stakes. This finale, by bringing so many of those threads together, was a clear signal from the writers that the time you have invested in the lore actually matters. However, this new complexity brought a problem of its own. While it rewarded the players who read every line and remember every detail, it also started to alienate more casual players. We saw a lot of feedback from people who simply found the story confusing. They felt like they had to pay too much attention just to keep up. I mean, I don't know. know, man. Are you gonna rate it a 7 out of 10 because you don't get it? But I think this points to a real challenge for Kuro Games going forward. How do you keep building this deep interconnected story without making it impossible for new or returning players to jump in? It is a balancing act, right? And while this quest was a huge step forward, it is not clear they have figured that part out yet. But that ambitious structure was held up almost entirely by its presentation. The epic feeling of this quest was carried by the way it looked and sounded. The major cutscenes were phenomenal, and the musical score was consistently praised for how perfectly it fit the mood of every scene. This was the engine that drove those peak cinema reactions we saw everywhere. A key example of this was during the final battle, the score shifted into a modified instrumental version of Saving Light, one of the game's earliest promotional songs. For players who have been around since the beginning, this wasn't just background music, it was like nostalgia, even though it's a year ago, right? It's fostering a powerful feeling of coming full circle and connecting the game's very beginning to this huge cinematic moment. All of this builds up to the Avengers Assemble scene, where a lot of the playable cast finally comes together to face the final threat. The scene was a massive highlight for the community, building a sense of camaraderie that felt like a truly triumphant finale to the whole Renacita arc. But to really understand why this moment was so powerful, you have to look beyond the story itself and think about how a gacha game actually works. This scene works on a level outside of the story, what we would call a meta level, right? In a gacha game, you spend a lot of time and effort pulling for a roster of characters. You get attached to them. They become your collection. So when you see all of these characters, all the characters you've pulled, fighting side by side on a screen, it becomes more than a story moment. It is a validation of your entire journey as a player. A powerful psychological reward that tells you your investment mattered. It transforms your collection of individual units to a unified, actually canon team. And that reinforces the very reason people play these games. From that perspective, it was a brilliant move. I mean, visually, it was perfect. But when you look closer at what the characters were actually doing in that scene, that is where the spectacle starts to fall apart. And despite how incredible that final assembly looked, it was also the source of one of the biggest criticism of the entire quest. There was almost no meaningful interaction between the characters themselves. And before you hate me, don't hate me. I'm not the guy to be angry at, bro. The dialogue followed what you could call a hub and spoke model. Imagine the protagonist, Rover, as the center of a wheel, the hub. Every other character is a spoke, and they only ever talk to the hub. They almost never talk to each other. So you have this big epic scene, but it would just be like one character after another stepping forward to say their one line to Rover, and then just standing there silently. It felt like unnatural, almost like a really awkward school presentation where everyone is waiting for their turn to speak. And because of this, the cast didn't feel like a real team. They felt more like a collection of individuals who just happened to be standing in the same room. And I think people wanted to see those relationships develop naturally. For example, I don't know, Charo and Phoebe have no real reason to know each other. Seeing them interact before the big finale, even briefly, would have made their alliance feel much more earned. And the most cited example of this missed potential was the reunion between Augusta and Angel, or Galbrina, right? The lore established that these two were childhood friends, and Augusta had believed Angel was dead for years. This is a moment that should have been packed with emotion. Players were expecting shock, maybe some joy, maybe some of that raw emotion that you would realistically see in that situation. And instead, the interaction was described as off, almost cold. It was unsatisfying because it completely failed to deliver on the emotional payoff that the story had spent months building up. That one underdeveloped moment really became the symbol of this whole issue, showing a failure to create meaningful relationships within the cast. This difficulty in handling the main cast's relationships is even more interesting when you compare it to how the story handled its most important non-playable character. The character writing in this patch can really be understood by looking at two specific arcs: its single big success and its growing most divisive problem. The success almost universally was the NPC Avidius. His story was complete. We saw him go from a puppet of the villain to someone struggling for his own identity to a hero who makes the ultimate sacrifice in the final act of defiance. The community response to him was overwhelmingly positive, with the main complaints just being that he wasn't a playable character because his story was just so good. People want him to be playable. Isn't that crazy? But the reason his arc felt so impactful is directly tied to the fact that he isn't a playable character. He is not a product the game needs to sell you. This gave the the writers the freedom to give him something that playable characters in a gacha game almost never get: a definitive tragic ending. He could actually die, and that gave his story real weight and emotional stakes that the main cast often lacks. It's like my tears for 𝗶𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗁. Was that all for nothing? I mean, I love her, and of course I wanted her to be alive, but why does she have to be alive? Come on, you don't get it, bro. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have Cristoforo. The main antagonist is becoming a source of genuine player fatigue. We are seeing more and more people say that they're just tired of him. The issue is the repetitive, all according to my Keikaku trope. Every time the heroes achieve something, every time they think that they won, Cristoforo appears to reveal their trap card to reveal that their victory was actually just another step in his grand, flawless design. It is a classic mastermind villain. While that can be effective, once or twice, or even 3 times, when it happens over and over, it starts to erode the stakes, It makes the heroes' actions feel meaningless. If the villain can never truly lose, even when he's losing, then the heroes can never truly win. And the result is a sense of powerlessness for the player, which is the last thing that you want in a game like this. The villain paradoxically becomes less threatening because you stop believing that your actions can actually change the outcome. And now some people still find this intellectual side of villainy compelling, and that's fair, But the dominant feeling is that the character is stuck in a loop. For the story to have real tension again, he either needs to evolve beyond this trope or he needs to suffer a genuine unplanned defeat. The issue of player actions feel meaningless wasn't just a narrative problem, it also bled into the gameplay experience itself. The actual experience of playing through this quest was a study in extremes. On one hand, you have these incredible high-budget cinematic moments that were universally praised. They are the reason people were calling this update's peak cinema. But then, the moment the cutscene ends, you're dropped back into the standard in-engine dialogue scene. And the drop in quality is a lot different. It's 6-7, am I right? No? Okay. Players consistently pointed out the clunky animations, and sometimes the awkward lip sync, and sometimes even the stone-cold facial expressions that happen outside of those big pre-rendered moments. The outcome is a whiplash effect. The amazing parts actually make the average parts feel worse by comparison, and it pulls you right out of the story. The peaks are so high that they only make the valleys feel deeper. I hope that makes sense. This disconnect wasn't just a visual, it also showed up in the quest's attempts to add more interactivity. The new time dialogue choices, basically QuickTime events, were almost universally disliked. They were seen as pointless. They added a layer of stress and anxiety to conversations without offering any real choice or changing the story's outcome. And because you can't replay the quest, it just leaves you with this nagging feeling that you might have picked the wrong option, even if there wasn't one. It is interactivity for the sake of it, without any actual substance. An even bigger issue for some was the final boss encounter itself. After hours of incredible narrative build-up, with all of the characters assembled and the music swelling, the final fight was against what many players felt was just a reskin of a boss we have fought before. This really killed the momentum for a lot of people. You have this epic story, these amazing cinematics, and then the gameplay payoff at the most critical moment feels recycled. It points to a real disconnect between the story's ambition and its gameplay execution. So when you put all of these pieces together, the narrative highs and the lows, the technical triumphs and the stumbles, you get the picture of a story that was incredibly ambitious but also deeply flawed. Ultimately, this finale feels like a reflection of a developer in transition. It shows Kuro Games has a growing confidence and a clear ambition to deliver a big, serialized story that respects the players who have stuck with it. The high points of this quest, the big cinematics, the emotional climaxes, prove that they are capable of creating truly phenomenal moments that can stand out in this very crowded genre. But it also lays bare the areas that require the most attention. To really reach its potential, the story needs to be more than just a spectacle. It needs consistent technical quality between the big moments and the small ones. It needs deeper character relationships that go beyond just talking to the protagonist. It needs antagonists who can be genuinely challenged and defeated, so that the player's victories feel earned. Or you know what, Kuro Games? The main character doesn't have to win. Make them lose. Go ahead, make them lose everything. And I think that would be a great plot. But you know what? In the end, the 2.7 patch story was successful. It created a real hunger for what comes next. But but in doing so, it also sets a very high bar for both its incredible cinematic peaks and for its reoccurring narrative pitfalls. So that leaves a question for the future. Moving forward, what do you think Kuro should prioritize? Should they double down on elevating these huge, cinematic Avenger-style moments, or should they focus their resources on refining the smaller, more intimate character interactions that were so heavily criticized this patch? Let me know your thoughts below, but that is all from me, 𝗖𝗆𝗆𝗵𝗁, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers,